Ladies and gentlemen, the following podcast is set for one episode. Your host from Columbus, Ohio is Michael Kirk. Welcome to the Outlaw Mudcast. Hello and welcome to the Outlaw Mudcast, your digital audio dirt sheet for all things Supershow. And on today's very special episode of the Outlaw Mudcast, I am joined by the founder and CEO of SRG Universe, and the writer of Supershow the Comic, currently available as part of the Kickstarter campaign, Supershow the Comic Issues 1 and 2, now available on Kickstarter. Ladies and gentlemen, here he is, the SRG BOSS, Steve Resk. Steve, welcome to the show.
Mr. Kirk, thank you for having me. I feel like you always do bring out the best in your interviews, and I love coming on the show, but I would like to point out that I am a writer for the Supershow comics, as it is a collective effort. And while I pen most of them, I bounce a lot of stuff off our team, so I don't want to take full credit for that. It is a group effort.
Okay, well then one of the writers. So let's start with there. Who would be the other writers of the Supershow the Comic?
So I have written bulk of the stories. I collaborate with Mr. Patrick Mulligan, bouncing a lot of ideas off them. We have an editor who used to edit some stuff. His name was Zane. Evan Harris throws some editing in there from now. And actually the LEO, aka The Law, your best damn commentator period, has been working with me on the storylines as well. So collectively, we bounce off ideas off all of us. And a lot of credit has to go to the SRG Universe community. There are some original characters that I'm trying to focus the storylines on, but there's a lot of stuff that's happened in the community in real life, and as well as some of the fantasy characters that they've created that have helped, tie our main characters together. And that's been one of the most fun aspects of writing this story.
All right. Well, we'll get into that in just a moment. But first, I have to ask the question I think that a lot of people will be curious about. Why comics?
For me, I'm waiting for everybody to catch up. I want to do everything, and I've said that for a long time. When I first worked on Supershow the Game, I always pictured it as more than just a game, but the opportunities to make toys and comics, and ultimately a cartoon or some sort of animation. And then, hopefully these characters have enough value where people would want to work on films. I just really enjoy the creative process and the art forms on every media platform. And for me, I always go for the lowest hanging fruit, so to say. And I think that comic books, aside from just written stories, would be the next most accessible step for us. And once we have these comic books where the story is actually mapped out and there's visuals, because they always say, seeing is believing, and people are able to read it, that's when we could kind of show them off a little bit more and maybe have other people with particular skill sets that we don't have available right now, maybe in video games or animations or things like that. I think it'd be much more accessible having a finished comic book with the storyline all fleshed out.
All right. So is this sort of your first primary vehicle to get the backstory, the narrative foundation of Supershow the Game out into the world?
Yeah, I would say this is the ground level of that. We've always had backstories in mind, and some, we just scratched the surface of these characters and who they are. And as we've been working on the comic book with the success of the Kickstarter, we've really been diving much, much deeper. Not just a concept of the character, but who they are, where they were from, who their parents were, who their grandparents were in some cases, what brought them to the Legendary Fighting Federation. Are they fighting for something relevant? Are they fighting for something for fun? What kind of position are they in financially? And this is basically like how we've painted the picture on these characters, which originally were just, we had maybe a little paragraph about who the character was. Now we have pages and pages developing who they are as a person, down to, timelines and family trees.
So would you say working on the book has really helped you sort of flesh out and explore these characters you've created in ways you never conceived of when you originally put them out there?
Oh, absolutely. And it's been one of the most fun parts. These books, obviously, they focus heavily on Rock Newman and El Super Hombre and the Hombre family legacy, as well as a lot of other characters, but really being able to dive down and create, not only a backstory, but an origin story of his whole family. And again, trying to get in the mindset of making everything make sense, right? And everything be connected. They were lucha libres. Were they from Mexico? Were they from America? Like, these things are relevant to the development of the characters. And we really have dived so far deep down that, for me, it almost consumes you sometimes. Like, when you get in the groove of writing, sometimes you're just writing and writing and writing, and you're jotting down ideas and you're going back and making sure they all add up. And sometimes I find myself writing for like maybe an hour at a time, and just all these notes. And then you go back and you review the notes and you make sure things are consistent. And as you're reading it, this would be really great if this character tied into that one. And you actually, in your mind, you're visualizing this universe growing and these characters really taking life. And that's been, to me, one of the most exciting and gratifying points, to be able to get these ideas from your head to the paper, and then the paper gets illustrated by Kieran. It's really been an incredible experience. But you said it perfectly. We never imagined how far you'd have to dive. It's so important understanding characters' motives and what drives them, and you really have to get deep into who they are and what's happened to them in their life to really understand the character and what's going to drive them throughout the story.
Have you found, as you've worked on this, that characters have ended up going ways you never envisioned them going? That you thought a character might be one way, and then as you've written, it turns out, well, actually, he's more like this, or she's more like that.
Oh, absolutely. Making some of these characters, you had some ideas for them, and then it'd be like, well, you can't do that, because if you do it that way, then that character comes off as bad. And do we really want to paint the character, if that was the motive, as a bad character throughout the storyline? And so sometimes we've backtracked on the reasons they've done things. And we found that we have switched up some ideas that we've had for characters. Some characters that were looking to be a little bit more goofy might have got a little bit more serious, or some characters that we felt would play a minor role in the storyline ended up being like, oh no, wow, we could really use this for something major, to kind of open up the world to a bigger problem and a bigger issue. And if you go down that path, you can see, like, for example, guys like the hypnotist Hans Mesmer. He had a cameo in one of the issues. And as we started talking about the possibility of the characters being tied to a mental institution, which was already written in, and it being financed by this company that was corrupt, we figured that the hypnotist could be a big player in that realm, right? Because now he's a part of a mental institution. He's being funded by this corrupt business, and he's locating people that have been his patients. And now this could open the door to having multiple other patients that he's come across in the past. So that was one of the examples where we kind of just did something fun with him, and we realized that, wow, should we go this route on later story arcs, there is so much stuff we could do. And we ended up spending a couple days where we were talking about that storyline and how far it would go.
So when you sit down and talk to storylines, is it just you and Patrick Mulligan? And I know you mentioned your editor, which sounds like the editor is no longer on the project at the moment.
So the way the stories were originally written, I had almost written all of them as like one-ofs, just cool little backstories, how people came into it. And this started up maybe about 5 years ago. And there were all these little standalone issues, like this is how the Rising Sun debuted, this is how the Wreck debuted, this is how GPS debuted, Mr. Pop and Twist debuted. And they were all just like one-off fun stories where I felt like I could take these Super Show characters and intertwine them, but there wasn't any real continuity to it. So those original stories, they went to an editor by a guy named Zane, and he would take what I would write in like regular paragraph narrative form, and he'd break them down into panels for us. And he did all this in blocks years ago. Now he doesn't do that, but I still would like to credit him, even though the stories have evolved and adapted from them, because he was there in the ground stages of things. And I think that any person who's contributed should be acknowledged in some way. But now, since I work with Kieran directly, I write the narratives and I'm able to break them down into panel descriptions, which I wasn't able to do on my own. So now I'm able to do that. So it'll start off as a narrative and I'll write down this idea, and then I'll basically get on a call with Pat Mulligan or Leo the Law, like I said, and I'll bounce the ideas off them. This is what I'm thinking. Or Christopher Guardino from Why Wrestling, he had reached out too recently, was like, I'd love to help out with some storyboarding. I said, absolutely, Chris. And then I throw some ideas off him, as he's a big comic book reader. So that was always the process. It was basically originally started off as standalones. Now everything is very continuous and on a straight timeline.
And so these issues coming out, these issues 1 and 2, they will not be standalone. They will be tied into a larger story.
Yes, so they are part of a story. And one of the things that Kieran had added to, which I think really helped transform comic books that I had written, was every issue will be written from one person's perspective. So as an inexperienced writer, sometimes I'd write an issue and it'd start off where, you're following Rock Newman and now you're looking at the Big Shot. So each issue will follow along from one person. And in most cases, it'll pick up either immediately from one person and jump to another perspective or shortly thereafter. So, for example, in issue number 1, The Lead, we follow a character who is El Super Hombre, and he shows up at the Legendary Fighting Federation, and he has his tryout. I won't get too much into the details with it, but at the end, he is in the same place as Rock Newman, and then issue 2, the follow-up, starts from Rock Newman's perspective. It like the baton kind of passes, and all of the follow-up will be from Rock Newman's perspective. And then in issue 3, which we're already developing, we'll start off from Paulie the Pigeon's perspective. And then 4, someone will come from the Big Shot. It'll follow him. And now all the other components and players are still there, but it's one storyline moving directly through from the whole first series.
All right. I have heard that there are 12 issues at this point written. I don't know if that's completely written or just worked through at least issue 12. Is that going to be...
On my drive, there's probably 12 or more. But so, for example, when we say there's probably more than 12 issues written, but some issues were, for example, the finale of the CCC, where we had a comic book issue written with Lemmy Adam and Poppin' Twist having a face-off in the ring, and basically everything that happened in that year's CCC, which was a lot of fun to write, and visually I think it's going to be amazing. But will that find its way into season 1 or series 1? I don't think so. Pat Mulligan has also brainstormed a lot of stories that revolve around the Three Kings and some later stuff with the XCW, and there's a lot of stuff that we've worked with him on that. But will those complete issues that he written be part of series 1? Probably not. But there is a big collection of stories that has been written, and I would say easily over 12 issues.
So is your plan with launching these comic books to sort of launch them as mini-series? So like the first set will be like a volume 1, and then the next thing will have like volume 2, issue 1 through so number of issues. Is that kind of the way you're looking at putting these books out?
It's a very hard question for me because, again, I'm thinking so big with the storylines, and I've been consulting with people on our team on what's the arc to do. Like, I want to have issue 1 has a clear-cut story, but it also has mini stories within it that move this story along. However, those stories could kind of branch off on their own should they want to. So basically, the way I always kind of envision is kind of what Marvel's doing right now, right? Like Marvel will release a series, which they call like phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. But in between doing phase 1, they might throw some other like one-off stories out on the side.
So when you say series, you're almost talking like here's an overarching story arc that travels over many issues. Then there may be a few issues in between. Then we might have a whole new big story arc, and you're calling those story arcs Series 1, Series 2, so on and so forth. Is that kind of what I'm understanding from you?
Yes, I don't know if they'll actually be called Series 1, Series 2, and Series 3, but that's exactly correct. So like we have a story arc where we know, for Series 1, this is our starting point, this is our ending point, and then issue 1 of Series 2 is already written, and we know where we're going from that one, and then leading into Series 3. So like we have the overview of everything mapped out where we want to go, and now we're kind of going back to the episodes that are written and making sure that everything is intertwined the way we want it to be. But again, as I said, there are some cool storylines where there's a minor character or a minor storyline that we develop in Series 1 that opens the door for us to write a whole lot more about that character going forward.
All right. So from what we've talked about so far, the first issue is going to revolve around the origins of El Superhombre and his entrance into the LFF. Issue 2 will take place sort of following that and switch to Rock Newman's perspective. So imagine we'll be getting sort of an introduction to some of the members of Newman's henchmen.
Absolutely. So what the first 2 issues are trying to establish is the LFF, what it is, what's the reason for it, and they're trying to give you a little bit of a taste of why certain people are there and how they came to be. So Hombre is part of what's called the Hombre family legacy, and in the history of lucha libre and wrestling, there was a wrestling empire basically built off the back of El Hombre del Dios prior to his retirement. So that's one of the things. And now the Hombre legacy has, not to give away too much of the storyline, has some sort of like a blessing curse thing tied to the mask. And this is what's going to unfold the mystery of what really happened with the Hombres, what caused it, and why El Superhombre is here now, trying to fight and prove his worth to take on the Hombre family legacy and wear the Hombre del Dios mask that we've become familiar with, that purple and pink mask.
Okay, yeah, I can say that the idea of an Hombre family is definitely a new concept. It's something I've heard about before, so very much looking forward to seeing how that ends up being in the book.
And that's where I think a lot of the fun has come from. Naming his grandparents that started off. His ring name was El Jefe Hombre, and his wife was Gloria. Last names are pretty important, and their real names that come up, they might be names you're familiar with. That'll help paint a picture of who's Newman and who's Valiant. So that the Valiant name will be tied to the Hombre family legacy, and the Valiants will be very tied to Rock Newman. And as the story will unfold, you'll find out what role Snake Pit had played in El Hombre del Dios and his retirement, and the story will unfold this way. Again, to me, it's really exciting because there's so much stuff I want to just tell you about these characters and who they are. But it's hard to without revealing too much of the plot.
Okay, well we'll go ahead and move off the plot for a minute because I know you want to kind of keep that under wraps. You want people to sort of go into it blind to a certain degree. What would you say is a thing in these first 2 issues that you think the readers will find the most surprising, the most unexpected? And again, I would encourage you keep it general.
So
you can spoil it out later if you want, but
most surprising is a tough one for this one because this one is really laying a lot of groundwork. I think that what people might find most surprising is kind of what we said with El Superhombre. El Superhombre is not the guy. He's a tryout here. We've always heard El Superhombre is the man himself. He's the face of the LFF, but this is the early days where he's literally doing a tryout against the big shot as he walks in the LFF for the first time. And the second issue follows up with the tryouts continue, and the Rock Newman has somebody in his office kidnapped with a burlap sack over his head, and there's a reveal on who that is and how they're connected, and that seems to be a lot of fun in that.
Yeah.
Brock Newman also has a pet.
We're
I think
briefly
a lot of
joined
people
by.
wanted to take him as a pet. That was right. That was Victoria Jill crawling on in here. She's mobile now.
Yes. That's right. From the tag team Boss and Sage Babies, one of the two babies, Victoria Joe. Welcome to the show. Thank you.
That was our first cameo here on the Outlaw Mudcast.
That's right. And I think the last thing before we move on from talking more about the campaign than the book, what would you say you are happiest with that came together for the first book? What's the thing you like the most about the first couple books?
The first couple books, what made me the happiest was looking back on it and seeing how many seeds were planted or how many Easter eggs were planted in there. And there's a lot. Because again, we're trying a really ambitious project with this and creating a whole world, and to be able to give you a taste of everything in just 2 issues is a big undertaking. And going back and looking at the issues and knowing that, okay, when we get to this point in the game, somebody could go, oh, wow, that was in issue 1. Oh, that was also in issue 1. They really did plan all this stuff out. This is not just something where they're just, spinning a wheel and saying, this is what we're going to go with now. So being able to go back and see like all those little hints, and Kieran, probably I drive him crazy with this. When make sure that this isn't on the table in the background. Make sure that this logo is on the paperwork that's hanging up. Make sure that this person's corporation is on the truck that drives by. And that was really one of the coolest things that I felt is the bits. And we wanted to hit so many different points, and we were able to hit so many of them in the first 2 issues.
All right. So for those of you listening, if you're interested in these 2 issues, the way you can get them is through the Kickstarter campaign on Kickstarter.com for Supershow the Comic, number 1 and number 2 by SRG Universe. Little update as I'm recording this. This is on April 20th, 2021. The current pledge goal is $18,000. Sorry, the current pledge total is $18,347 with 201 backers and 5 days to go. The campaign ends Sunday night, April 25th at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time. So you've hit your 200 backers. I know you're pushing for as many backers as possible. But I know that you've been pushing for a stretch goal for 200 backers.
So the stretch goal was actually a reverse stretch goal, where the first 200 backers had access to a card that the next backers would not. That was like their early bird backer. The bigger stretch goal was 300 backers to unlock something, which I would say is you never want to say out of reach, but might be out of reach with a 5-day span. You always get that last influx in the last 48 hours of people seeing the project ending and jumping in. But the first 200 backers will be able to get an extra promo for getting in there early.
Yes, they will. There's also, I know, some other community goals: comment goal, share goal. Share goal about 40% of the way through, 200 out of 500. Comments, not quite as good, only 146 so far. I'll ask this because I know this was the thing with the last Kickstarter. Is it commenters or is it comments?
Comments.
Comments. Okay, so if one person wanted to write 500 comments, as long as they weren't just copy and paste, that would hit the goal.
Yes, and what I had tried to stretch is like, let's make that a last resort, right?
Right.
Basically want people to have some conversations on there, and get it up there just organically, more or less.
Oh no, I agree. That would definitely be more desirable.
Yeah, rather than just somebody go on there and put an A, which would be within the rules. But once in a while, we don't want to have to be sticklers for everything, because we would prefer that you guys got more stuff out of it, right? We want this to be something where you're really happy with at the end. People have put up their money to support us. So realistically, I love the fact that people are like, this value is incredible. Wait, you mean to tell me I'm going to get with a $15 pledge right now, I'm going to get a comic book, 4 printouts, 2 competitor cards, 7 promos, which is probably higher than 7 now. And a lot of people have kind of wised up for that, and they're asking, can I do multiple tiers? And the answer is yes. And people have been making secondary accounts to order a second time, which is perfectly acceptable. And I think it's actually a great move.
Yeah, no, there's definitely good value at $15 to get all the printed and digital stretch goals, because there are some digital only. A lot of the spotlights are digital only. There are some that are printed. The size on the printed ones, is that going to be about the same size as the comic itself?
Yes, and the reason that was done is for us to be able to ship it to you. So it'll be about the same size. You said it perfectly. It'll be shipped in that. You see that we got a nice protective cardboard case that'll come with it. Those will be slipped right in there with it. And we've unlocked El Super Hombre, Snake Pit, Sage, and Gia. Now, Super Hombre and Snake Pit are very rooted deeply in the stories in Series 1. Sage and Gia may show up, but that was more of a decision because we felt that visually that would be something people would really like to have, Sage and Gia.
I can agree with that. I believe Gia's quite popular character in this game. I know that there was a big push last year to break the Gia curse, which may or may not be featured in a future issue of Supershow the comic.
So there will be Gia with the curse. Now I remember a while ago I had read the story that was written by Mike Riot, and I don't know if, because somebody mentioned the other day, if we're using the exact same rendition, but we're trying to tie it into the Hombre Legacy story, and I feel we've done a really great job with that. And so there will be Gia, she'll be a big part in tying up, bringing the legacy into the open, and also the Raven's Blood Cemetery as a whole, the people that are involved in that, because it will not only be Gia, they'll help kind of bridge the gap into the supernatural world for the LFF. It's not going crazy over the top, but you can expect some things, especially with Sage in there. There are spells, there are curses, there are gifts, there are things that are outside the realm of the natural world. And it's been really cool to incorporate that and go that route with these stories. And I think it's made for much bigger, more larger than life characters when you're able to add that sort of element to it.
All right. Let's see what else I want to bring up. One of the top tiers in the pledges is the spotlights. How will the competitor getting their own spotlight in issues 1 and 2 affect that competitor maybe being written into the comic book sooner, maybe rather than they might have been previously? Because I've just been thinking, if you got a no effect.
Yeah, I mean the comic book storylines are. Let me digress. I shouldn't say no effect. Maybe it would give them more of a cameo, but appearance. But I don't know if it would be a significant storyline, because as I said, we do have an overall game plan, and I've stressed to some people have asked me. We have this story in mind. We do incorporate some people from the LFF community on a small scale, but I would say come to like series 3 is when we're going to really try to bring in other people's characters. So if you did the spotlight, you're obviously going to be in the book, right? So you're going to have a description of your character. So in that sense, anybody who's a reader is going to know of your character. But I don't think that that's a first-class trip to get written into the storyline. I could say that the people that do support us will have mentions and cameos, but we'll see how far it goes. Some of them fit a little bit better into the storyline. For example, some of our spotlight guys currently are Hold the Line Harry, The Void, and Meta, who's done Viral, and Rig Simmons. There was some like prequel content for episodes 1 and 2 where they're building the ring, and Rig Simmons is a ring crew guy. It would just be natural to kind of stick him in as somebody building a ring in one of the episodes if that was on camera or on scene, so to say, right? So I feel like that's something that's very easily put in there. Now, somebody like the Void, as I said, that Gia is kind of the bridge of the gap, and the Gia curse basically takes the Ombre legacy and changes it from a fairy tale to something that's possible, right? When Gia comes into the play. Now, that's going to tie you into characters like Gropar the Great and Powerful and Sage the Wiccan Witch. Now, Sage, there are some scenes where Sage is going into the magical history books and looking up some things. It could be very easily put in there while she's flipping through books. There's images of the Void in there as well, because that's the type of things that she would be into. So I feel like those would be a little bit more easily to tie into the storyline we're going to. Something like Hold the Line Harry, I could see him being a feature somewhere as maybe enhancement talent or a doorman or something like that before we really get into the story of Hold the Line Harry and some of the real life things he's done in Supershow, which will be incorporated into the storyline at some point. So that's what basically I feel like it's easier for some guys to be snuck in, but it's not really a guarantee.
All right. Well, was there anything else you'd like to bring up about the Kickstarter campaign for Supershow the Comic issues number 1 and number 2?
I would say if this is something that people are really interested in, I think that going into this, know that there is, big pictures here. And I think that you guys are going to be very pleasantly surprised with how we managed to intertwine so many characters. Characters that we didn't really think might mesh as well as they did. I keep talking about the Ombre family legacy because that's what's really what we're focusing on, and how that ties in the Valiants to Rock Newman, and how that ties them into Ventura Capital, which is a very wealthy family that's involved, and how it brings about Evie Laveau and the Witch Hunter General, and where Snake Pit fits into the whole thing, and the roles that these people play. And then what's really exciting is you have guys like Merlin von Berlin and D1, D2, D3, and Harrietta the Bearded Diva, and the Wreck and the Pack, and how these guys show up and they're able to move this whole story down. So I would say that if you're going to get into this, just understand that it's going to be a long ride. I don't look at this as something that, hey, we're going to do one series and it's going to be done. I'm really looking to build a whole universe. Inspirations for this are Marvel, which I love Marvel, especially the cinematic Marvel universe, and I loved The Simpsons growing up. And what I loved about those things is Marvel just kept going deeper and deeper and deeper, and that's kind of what we're trying to emulate with all these different timelines that line up. And The Simpsons really gave value to every single person in that town of Springfield and Cheveleyville and all over there. That they really did a good job of creating a world, and that's what we're looking to do. And issue 1 and 2 is just the start of it. So I'm really confident that the people that are interested in this stuff and involved with it, they're going to look back in 4 or 5 years, whatever it takes, to kind of really build this whole environment, that they're going to go, wow, this is really going to be a part of pop culture. This is going to be something that is recognizable, and we were able to get involved and help build it. So that's really my pitch on this Kickstarter. It's going to be cool to look at now, but it's really going to be a long process. Sort of like Supershow the Game, right? I've been quoted saying that I always had the idea of Supershow, in my head, but it wasn't until about year 2 or 3 that we were really able to get to the point where we wanted, with like a larger card pool and different stipulations and match types and all these characters. And that's kind of the same process we're in now with the storybooks, right? We're able to do issue 1 and 2 and focus on just a couple characters, just like we were with the game. But you're going to look back at this in 2 years and say, wow, these books focused on, maybe 6, 7, 8 characters. Now we have stories that are covering 50 to 100 characters. And that's really where I'd like to get to.
Yeah, speaking of looking forward, I notice looking at the pledge tiers right now, the delivery date estimated is December of this year. For the next issues, for issues 3, 4, and beyond, are you looking to release those through Kickstarter campaigns as well? Are you thinking about a different delivery system? What are your sort of thoughts on people once they get these in their hands, they read issue 1 and issue 2, and they're waiting for issue 3? What are your thoughts about how you're going to deliver those to
Right now, we're taking it one day at a time. It's hard to
them?
say if it's going to be Kickstarter. I will tell you that we will be instantly working on issues 3, 4, and 5 almost instantly. Kieran is going to be moved into a role where he's working on the comics with us. I hoped on like a full-time scale, right? At least till we have all of Series 1 completed and lettered and inked. That would really be the route that we're looking to go. Whether it's going to be another Kickstarter thing, we'll see. I mean, there have been instances where a second Kickstarter where people they see issue 1 and 2 and they say, wow, this is really good stuff. This is cool. I want more of it. It could help push a next Kickstarter over the top. So that's always a possibility as well. But we really haven't decided what avenue we're going to go through just yet. We're really focusing on let's deliver a high quality issue 1 and 2. We're doing something different with this one, right? Because we're going to include people in via the Kickstarter and some panels and credits. So there'll be some touch-up work that needs to be done. How long of that process, how much that process takes up will be influential to how 3 and 4 are done, right? If we feel as like, wow, this was a really big holdup, we don't want to hold up the story to make sure this guy's face is in it the right way, then we would have to take a look at, does a Kickstarter make sense if you're not offering those cool tiers where somebody could get their name on it or they could get drawn in or get a spotlight. So that's really where we're at right now. We want to just do this very well done. We want to get it delivered before the promised delivery date. We went a little bit higher to make sure that we could deliver it to you in a timely fashion. And once all that is in place, we get a feel for what it's like to assemble, a few hundred of these at a time to get them shipped out and to be able to store them. Then we'll have a better picture on what we're looking to do, especially with COVID, Mike. It's really tough because for all we know, these could be really popular and conventions could open up. And now we start going to Comic Cons and we're selling comic books and there's a stand for SRG that's selling comic books. The demand might be pretty high and maybe they say, Kickstarter is a good idea or it's not. It's really just too early to tell.
All right. One last thing, not Kickstarter related, because this just sort of broke yesterday. There's been a rule. This is going to be more Supershow the Game related, so sorry to sort of throw you this curveball. But there's been a rule change regarding multiplayer matches and gimmicks having to target particular competitors. What made you decide to make that rule change?
Degeneracy.
Degeneracy?
Yeah, for to oversimplify. Basically, okay. I love the multiplayer format. It's very easy to exploit. And it's also with the amount of created content that we have, we don't really want to like every single character started getting to the point where it was like at the start of the match, choose one player and choose this. So gimmicks are becoming a lot more wordy than we like. I love that clean, simple 1, maybe 2 lines of text as your gimmick. And we kept having to add this and add this and add this. And then there's always these extreme combinations. And it's just human nature when you want to win to do that. And a lot of times these crazy tag team combos, they're very degenerate is not the word I was looking for. Where like repressive. They shut your opponent out. Sometimes you have a combination where, let me give an example of like Rage and Numero Uno, right? As a tag team. Now I have, if either player rolls a strike, I'm getting +2. And if any player rolls a 10, I'm getting +2. And now team A is the big shot and the rising sun because they're just, they're new to the game and they want to play and they can't win a turn roll, right? Now, you really minimize that sort of stuff with the rule that we put in place. So I should describe what the rule change is. I don't know if it's apparent, but at the start of a match, in a multiplayer match, you're basically going to choose a target for your gimmick if your gimmick specifically makes you do something to multiple people. So for example, if I'm the Witch Hunter General, at the start of the match, I choose one opponent. Whenever I roll grapple, that person randomly buries one card. All people will have to choose an opponent because they might have spotlight effects, right? The spotlights will no longer hit both people because, again, that's really pushing people to come up with these combos in tag team that make things really oppressive. That was the word I was looking for. So you're going to have to pick a target. However, whenever the crowd meter goes up, you'll be able to pick a new target. And I think that this thing balances out the game a hell of a lot more. And I always imagined it almost like, remember in N64, you had games like WWE No Mercy and WrestleMania 2000, where you could toggle between like which person you were focused on. And this is exactly the same concept where you're going to toggle on who you're focused on. And when the crowd meter increases, you could switch your target. And I think this is going to address a hell of a lot of some of the problem characters that we've seen over the years, like King Greatness, who has multiple triggers to pick up a card from the discard pile. Highwater has multiple triggers to pick up cards from the discard pile. Johnny Eldorado will be slightly slowed down. Not as much, but at least it'll reduce the times that a double team will go off. Right? He won't just be able to trigger on characters or double teams. And, some of the more problematic spotlights that say your opponent can't move cards from the discard pile to their hand and they don't specify choose one player. Snake Pit, who's been complained about in tag team a lot, he only had to be less cards in hands than one opponent, regardless of the whole field. Now he's going to have to pick somebody. This is not only going to help tag team, but it's also going to help claim the throne style matches. It's also going to help out birdcage styles matches, which are becoming more popular as we do group things for title shots. So I feel we bounce back and forth on so many different ideas for how to make a better gaming environment for the multiplayer aspect. And when we came to this, it was myself and Young Allergy. We were like talking about fixes, and this like popped into my head, and I threw this out to him, and he was like, "No, wow, that feels really good. That sounds right." And I was like, "You know what? Let's mark this down. I think that solution has a nice feel to it. It doesn't neuter all these characters. It gives you some options, some strategy. Maybe you want to raise the crowd meter deliberately, and it felt really good when we were play testing." And we were trying it out because it didn't feel like you were locked in. It felt like you had options. And that was really the reason for it. Just to draw on that a little bit further, I always love to do tag team matches in the Boss Friday Beatdowns, and there's one coming up this Friday, because people aren't prepping their tag teams. Right? So they're playing two characters that are good in singles, and they play them in tag team. And even though some people say, "Oh, I don't like the fact that I was 0-3 could make it in," right? The overall feel when I spoke to people, I said, "How'd your match go?" "Oh, we had a great match. It was 4 crowd meter, was this." They were really excited. And I think that happened because you had the true essence of the game where you had 4 random characters thrown into a mix, rather than when we say, "Hey, we're going to have a tag team match," and people sit down and say, "What's the best possible combo that I can get?" And you'll still be able to figure out the best combos, but I think that we've really toned down, as I mentioned earlier, the degeneracy on some of the things that you could do in tag that were either more powerful than we anticipated, or there were some combos that didn't even exist when they were printed to make them happen.
All right.
How do you feel about that rules change, Mike? Let me ask you some questions.
How do I feel about the rules change? I think it's interesting. I definitely saw the Snake Pit thing. A lot of people are very familiar with the Duke from this most recent Claim the Throne match. The Duke will be targeting one person per crowd meter. I do like the idea that you can swap on the when the crowd meter changes, so you're not locked in. So if you're playing like an elimination match and somebody gets eliminated, if your gimmick was on that person, then your gimmick is not dead for the rest of the match. You can swap to somebody else.
Yes, and then I think that maybe an addendum would be on an elimination. You can, just to clarify, because I know some matches like the birdcage don't raise the crowd meter on elimination.
Right.
That if the crowd meter increases or a player is eliminated, you may take a new card, or the person you are targeting is eliminated, you may choose a new target.
Yeah, I like the idea that your gimmick just doesn't go dead. I have heard some concern that this, may make people whose gimmicks, revolve on their own roles. Like I'm looking at him right here, Brian Cage becomes more powerful, relatively speaking, because his gimmick triggers off his own roles, not an opponent's. I'm talking about the original Brian Cage, not the new one.
Yes, that's a good point. But I would also argue that Brian Cage is functioning with the statistics that he was designed for. Right? And that was like one of the issues with like a Joey Janela, right? Joey Janela, since he's targeting opponents, he has a really powerful gimmick. If somebody rolls a 10, he picks up a card from the discard pile. Now he's triggering twice as much mathematically. So he goes from a 1 in 6 trigger to a 1 in 3. Brian Cage, because we brought Joey Janela back to the same playing field, Brian Cage becomes better because he's still on that 1 in 6 trigger. Now, it's going to shift the meta up, right? When was the last time you saw a tag team do well that had Brian Cage on it? It was not even playable almost in these formats, right? Because everybody was doing, let me get Big Shot, Terra Skull, and Silent J, and then either a King Greatness or a High Water or a Haley Stevens or both. And all these combos where like people were literally just stockpiling the same characters because they know that they're just that much better in tag team, which is okay. But I think that after 5 or 6 years, this was a change that was definitely warranted, especially where it got to the point where we start printing characters and everybody's like, start of the match, choose an opponent. We could, on reprints, we could drop that. We could drop that from a lot of characters, and it'll simplify a lot of things going forward.
All right. Just wanted to get that out there because I know that was breaking news. That just debuted yesterday as part of the text on the sign up for the next Boss Roddy Beatdown.
I did see that there were some questions. One the brain had thrown out there was, how would Eddie Fury work? Eddie Fury targets himself. So I don't see any means for an interaction on something like that, right? And the cards that he uses. This was more for something that is increasing the odds of development of occurrences, right? So like a person like Terra, when it says when you hit a grapple, do this. Like she's not going to only have one person she could choose to bury against. She'll be able to do whatever she hits it with. And then furthermore, like a guy like the brain can re-roll anytime, right? He doesn't have to choose one opponent. And
I was looking at the brain.
I'd see. Maybe I've misspoke on the brain. I'd have to take a look at that because he says when you roll less than a person, so he might have to select a person.
He might have to select.
Yes. But like on the Eddie Fury example, you won't be able to pick and choose when your grapple is +5 if it's a 5 crowd meter, right? It'll always just be fat +5.
Right.
I think it'll help with stuff like Terra Skull, right? Terra Skulls, you're going to pick the person with the highest technique. Guess what? That's still a really good effect in a tag team match or a multiplayer match. Being able to shut somebody off. But now when you had combos where it was like the teams that did really well, like Big Shot and Terra Skull, there was just so much stuff going on. And there are other effects too. When you have, I want to compare the Claim the Throne where people drafted, and I know there are 2 different match types, to the Birdcage when everybody had to use a Cosmic, right? The Cosmics are designed, if you look at the deck list, to be able to play in Claim the Thrones and Birdcages and TLC matches and things like that. Our Birdcage, and again, take it with a grain of salt because a Birdcage is much less chaotic than a Claim the Throne because you can eliminate people. But our Birdcage match, we had no gimmicks that really were exploited, went so smooth. It was a fantastic match. It was a lot of fun. There are no hiccups, no hangups. And I think that we're just trying to get closer to that place where when you're choosing one thing and one target, there's a lot less calculation going on. There's a lot less, I don't want to say decision-making because decision-making is good, but you're minimizing complex decision-making and getting back to the flow of rolling dice and playing cards and everything going on and on.
All right. Well, thank you for clearing that up, Steve. I know that there were questions about that new rule change. But yeah, folks,
That doesn't mean that there might not be. I didn't mean to interrupt you again.
No, you're okay.
There might be some combos that are still crazy broken, and they might get booked for events. This is not going to be an instant fix for things. But I think that it does address a lot of the issues that we've found pretty eloquently and flavorfully.
Yeah, I still think a combo like Jacques and Jokerfish.
That was exactly the one.
Is still going to be really good with picking the same target.
Yes, but the problem was beforehand. Like it's really bad, right? That's a horrible combo to deal with. But imagine now they shred one player's hand, and now they're like, I'm going to go to this one. At least now they have to wait till the crowd meter increases. So while it won't fix a problem like that, it'll definitely slow it down at least a little bit. And then again, some combos like that, which have just been really, really tough to deal with, might just be where somebody says, hey, there's a rivalry in place between these two. They can't tag team together, on the GM's discretion. But that's definitely an example that comes to mind. But it's definitely better, right, if they have to target one person.
Yeah, no, it's definitely less devastating.
Like, say that one person gets making an impact out. They have no choice but to stay on that person. Or a backbuster or something that protects it. But I like the change, and we'll see how it goes. It's definitely going to shift some stuff up, but I think we're going to see a bigger variety of characters played now.
Yeah, we'll have to see how this affects the multiplayer format going forward.
And there were some questions, and then I'll let you go, Mike. I know you're a busy guy, about whether or not it would affect the online league that had started. And I will say I do not run the online league. They are free to make whatever decision they want. I would imagine that they would not implement any changes mid-season, but I cannot speak for those guys. In fact, I don't even know who those guys are at the moment.
All right. But yeah, I think that's all I had to bring up. Just want to say one more time for the listeners, Kickstarter campaign Supershow the Comic #1 and #2 by SRG Universe is live from now until April 25th at 8:30 p.m. There are multiple tiers that you can back at. The $15 tier gets you the digital books and all the stretch goals. The $70 tier gets you all the books, all the competitor sets, and all the stretch goals. And you can go higher still if you want to get yourself in either issue 1 or issue 2. Again, April 25th, Kickstarter.com, Supershow the Comic #1 and #2 by SRG. Steve, thank you for coming on.
It is my pleasure.
And that's going to do it for this special episode. I'd like to thank all of you for listening, and good day.